They thought they could trap him by blocking his only road. But by the week's end, their proud clubhouse stood stripped and filled with hay. His barn now, not theirs. I stood in my leather boots, watching 3 HOA security guards chain up the entrance to my own ranch road, while Kevin Matthews, our power-hungry HOA president, supervised with a satisfied smirk plastered across his face. The heavy steel chains wrapped around the gate posts like metal snakes, effectively trapping my cattle trucks and cutting off access to my 50-acre property that I'd worked my entire life to build. Kevin adjusted his expensive suit jacket and checked his gold watch, clearly enjoying every second of my apparent helplessness. The morning sun cast long shadows across the blocked entrance, and I could hear my prize-winning bulls getting restless in the distance, probably wondering why their feeding schedule was being disrupted. "Sorry, Marcus," Kevin called out in his fake, sympathetic voice, but according to HOA Regulation 47B, this road is now classified as a private community thoroughfare, and your commercial cattle operation violates our residential-only covenant. His 2 lackeys, Brad Henderson and Tyler Walsh, nodded enthusiastically behind him like trained puppies, both dressed in their matching HOA enforcement polo shirts. I watched Kevin pull out his phone and start recording, probably planning to post this victory on the community Facebook page where he loved to showcase his authority. The irony wasn't lost on me that this was the same man who'd moved into our rural community just 2 years ago and immediately started complaining about the farm smells and truck noise that had existed here for decades. My neighbor, old Pete Johnson, shuffled over from his porch, shaking his gray head in disgust at the spectacle unfolding before us. Pete had lived here since the 1970s, long before Kevin's fancy subdivision even existed, and he'd seen plenty of city folks try to change our way of life. "This ain't right, Marcus," Pete muttered, loud enough for Kevin to hear. "That road's been used by ranchers for over 30 years. Kevin just laughed and waved dismissively at Pete, clearly not caring about the history or the livelihoods he was destroying with his power-drunk decisions. But here's what Kevin didn't know, what none of them knew, was that this little stunt of his had just triggered the biggest mistake of his entire life. See, Kevin thought he was dealing with just another simple country rancher who would roll over and accept defeat. He had absolutely no idea about my background, my resources, or the fact that I've been quietly documenting every single one of his illegal power grabs for the past 18 months. As I stood there watching him celebrate his apparent victory, I was already 3 steps ahead, planning something that would not only get my road back, but would teach Kevin and his cronies a lesson they'd never forget. The chains clinked in the morning breeze as Kevin and his crew walked away, probably heading back to their air-conditioned HOA office to plan their next act of neighborhood tyranny. I pulled out my phone and made a quick call to my lawyer, letting him know it was time to execute the plan we'd been preparing for months. Kevin Matthews had just poked the wrong bear, and by the time I was finished with him, he'd wish he'd never heard of an HOA, let alone tried to run one. The game was about to change completely, and Kevin had no idea what was coming his way. Have you ever dealt with an HOA president who thought they owned the entire neighborhood? Let me know in the comments, because this story is just getting started. Kevin Matthews had moved into our peaceful Willowbrook Ranch community exactly 2 years, 3 months, and 12 days ago. Yes, I kept track because that's when our neighborhood paradise turned into a bureaucratic nightmare. This city slicker had sold his overpriced condo in downtown Dallas and decided he wanted the authentic rural experience, but only if he could remake it in his own image. Within 6 months of arriving, Kevin had somehow manipulated his way into becoming HOA president, promising the newer residents that he'd bring order and property values to our chaotic farming community. The man was obsessed with control in ways that would make dictators jealous, and he wielded the HOA rulebook like it was some kind of sacred scripture that gave him divine authority over everyone's lives. Kevin would spend his mornings walking around the neighborhood with his little clipboard, hunting for violations like some kind of suburban predator. He'd write citations for grass that was half an inch too tall, mailboxes that weren't the approved beige color, and garden decorations that didn't meet his aesthetic standards. His enforcement crew, Brad and Tyler, followed him around like devoted disciples, eager to please their master and earn their monthly HOA stipends. What made Kevin particularly dangerous was his complete lack of understanding about rural life, combined with his absolute certainty that he knew better than everyone else. He'd never owned livestock, never worked a farm, never understood the rhythms of agricultural life, yet he felt qualified to regulate every aspect of our operations. Kevin would complain about the sound of roosters at dawn, the smell of manure during fertilizing season, and the sight of farm equipment on his pristine streets. He'd stand in HOA meetings wearing his three-piece suits, lecturing fourth-generation ranchers about property standards and community image like we were children who needed his guidance. The fines started small: $25 for a horse trailer parked in a driveway, $50 for hay bales visible from the road. But Kevin's appetite for power grew with each successful enforcement action, and soon he was issuing $100 citations for excessive farm odors and threatening legal action against families who'd been working their land since before Kevin was born. He established a network of neighborhood spies, promising reduced HOA fees to residents who reported violations, turning neighbors against each other in his quest for total control. Kevin's masterpiece of tyranny was his creation of the Community Standards Committee, a fancy name for his personal enforcement squad that gave him the appearance of legitimate authority while allowing him to rule through fear and intimidation. He'd hold these committee meetings in the clubhouse every Tuesday evening, where he'd sit at the head of a long table like some kind of suburban king, reviewing violation reports and planning his next assault on our community's freedom. Brad and Tyler would present their weekly findings while Kevin nodded approvingly, occasionally making notes in his leather-bound planner. But Kevin's biggest character flaw was his arrogance. He genuinely believed that his city education and business background made him superior to everyone else in the community, especially us simple country folk. He'd make condescending comments about our quaint rural customs, while simultaneously trying to destroy them, never realizing that his neighbors weren't the ignorant farmers he imagined us to be. Kevin had no idea that several of us had advanced degrees, successful businesses, and connections that extended far beyond our little community. The man's ego was so inflated that he'd actually started referring to himself as President Matthews in official correspondence, and he'd had business cards printed with his title prominently displayed. Kevin would hand these cards out at community events like he was some kind of elected official, rather than just another resident who'd manipulated his way into a volunteer position. His office in the clubhouse was decorated with framed certificates from HOA management courses and a large photo of himself shaking hands with some minor city council member. Kevin's reign of terror had been building for months, but the morning he blocked my ranch road was the culmination of a systematic campaign designed to force me off my own property. It started 3 weeks earlier when Kevin had declared my cattle operation a commercial enterprise that violated the community's residential zoning, conveniently ignoring the fact that my ranch had been grandfathered in decades before the HOA even existed. He'd been sending me certified letters almost daily, each one more threatening than the last, demanding that I cease all agricultural activities and convert my property to residential compliance standards. The night before the road blockade, Kevin had called an emergency HOA meeting that he deliberately scheduled during my cattle auction in neighboring counties, ensuring I couldn't attend to defend myself. According to my neighbor Pete, who'd witnessed the whole charade, Kevin had presented a fabricated case against my ranch, claiming that my cattle trucks were damaging community infrastructure and that my operation posed health and safety risks to the neighborhood. Brad Henderson had presented doctored photos that made my well-maintained ranch look like some kind of environmental disaster, while Tyler Walsh read from a prepared statement about declining property values caused by my presence. What made Kevin's actions particularly sinister was that he'd spent weeks building his case through manipulation and outright lies, convincing newer residents who didn't know the community's history that my ranch was somehow an illegal intrusion on their suburban paradise. He'd organized a petition drive, going door to door with his polished sales pitch about protecting our investment and maintaining community standards, preying on people's fears about their home values. Kevin had even hired a sketchy surveyor to create maps that conveniently discovered that my access road was actually HOA property, despite county records clearly showing it as a legal easement dating back to 1987. The morning of the blockade, Kevin arrived with his enforcement team and 3 hired security guards, turning what should have been a civil matter into something resembling a military operation. He brought professional-grade chains and padlocks, along with official-looking signs declaring the road private HOA property, no trespassing, as if he was claiming territory in some kind of suburban conquest. Kevin had clearly planned this moment carefully, timing it to coincide with my morning cattle feeding schedule, knowing it would cause maximum disruption to my operation and send a message to the entire community about his power. But Kevin's biggest mistake wasn't just blocking the road. It was his decision to live stream the entire event on the community Facebook page, narrating his actions like some kind of triumphant general claiming victory over an enemy. He actually stood there in his expensive suit, talking to his phone camera about finally bringing order to Willowbrook Ranch community and showing these farmers that rules apply to everyone, completely oblivious to the fact that he was creating a permanent record of his illegal actions. His arrogance was so complete that he didn't even realize he was confessing to multiple crimes while broadcasting to hundreds of witnesses. What Kevin didn't know was that my access road was protected by a perpetual agricultural easement that had been legally established long before the HOA existed, making his blockade not just a civil matter, but a federal crime under agricultural protection laws. He'd been so focused on asserting his imagined authority that he never bothered to actually research the legal status of the property he was trying to control. Kevin's hired surveyor had apparently been more interested in collecting his fee than providing accurate information, giving Kevin the false confidence he needed to make the biggest legal blunder of his life. The irony was delicious. Kevin thought he was demonstrating his power and teaching me a lesson about respecting HOA authority, but he'd actually just handed me everything I needed to destroy him completely. While he was busy posing for his victory photos and planning his next power grab, I was already on the phone with my legal team, setting in motion a response that would not only restore my road access, but would expose every illegal thing Kevin had done since taking control of the HOA. He'd picked a fight with someone who had the resources, knowledge, and determination to fight back, and he was about to learn just how dangerous it could be to abuse power against the wrong person. What Kevin Matthews didn't realize was that he'd just declared war on someone who'd been preparing for this exact battle for over 18 months, quietly building an ironclad case against him while he strutted around thinking he was untouchable. See, my background wasn't actually in ranching. That was my retirement hobby after spending 25 years as a corporate litigation attorney specializing in property law and municipal corruption cases. I'd handled dozens of cases involving HOA overreach, municipal abuse, and corporate fraud, so Kevin's amateur hour intimidation tactics were like watching a child play with toy soldiers while a real general planned their strategy. The moment Kevin had started his campaign against the ranchers in our community, I'd begun what I called operation documentation, systematically recording every illegal action, every violation of due process, and every abuse of authority that Kevin and his crew committed. I'd installed discrete security cameras around my property that captured not just the road blockade, but months of Kevin's surveillance activities, his late-night trespassing to plant fake evidence, and his coordination meetings with Brad and Tyler, where they planned their harassment campaigns against community members who opposed them. My secret weapon wasn't just my legal background. It was my network of contacts throughout the county government, state agriculture department, and federal regulatory agencies that I'd built during my career representing rural communities against exactly this kind of abuse. While Kevin was busy playing dictator, I'd been having quiet conversations with county commissioners, state agricultural inspectors, and IRS investigators who were very interested in learning about an HOA president who was potentially embezzling community funds while violating federal agricultural protection laws. The financial investigation I'd initiated through my contacts at the state level had already uncovered some fascinating irregularities in Kevin's management of HOA funds, including mysterious payments to consulting companies that didn't seem to exist anywhere except on paper. It turned out that Kevin had been paying his enforcement crew through shell companies he'd created, avoiding proper tax reporting, and probably pocketing a significant percentage of the community's dues for himself. My forensic accountant friend, David Chun, had been quietly analyzing the HOA's financial record for months, building a case that would make Kevin's road blockade look like a minor infraction compared to his financial crimes. But the real masterpiece of my preparation was the comprehensive legal brief I'd been developing with my former law firm, documenting not just Kevin's violations against my ranch, but his systematic abuse of every rancher and longtime resident in the community. We'd interviewed dozens of neighbors who'd been victimized by Kevin's schemes, collected evidence of his fraudulent enforcement actions, and built a case that would not only destroy Kevin legally, but would expose the entire corrupt network he'd created within the HOA structure. Kevin's decision to live stream his road blockade had been the final piece of evidence I needed to complete my case, providing undeniable proof of his willful violation of federal agricultural easement laws, while he literally confessed his illegal intentions to a live audience. My legal team had been monitoring the stream in real time, immediately filing emergency injunctions and criminal complaints that were already being processed by multiple government agencies before Kevin had even finished his victory celebration. The beauty of my strategy was that Kevin had been so focused on harassing individual residents that he'd never noticed the bigger picture being assembled around him. A comprehensive case involving federal crimes, state violations, and civil rights abuses that would remove him from power and potentially land him in federal prison. While he'd been playing petty dictator, I've been building a legal nuclear weapon that would not only restore justice to our community, but would serve as a warning to any future would-be tyrants who thought they could abuse their neighbors with impunity. The first sign that Kevin's world was about to collapse came exactly 72 hours after his road blockade stunt, when 3 black SUVs pulled up to the HOA Clubhouse during the Tuesday evening Community Standards Committee meeting where Kevin was holding court like his usual dictatorial self. I've been invited to this meeting under the pretense of discussing compliance options for my ranch operation, but Kevin had no idea that I'd actually orchestrated this gathering to serve as the perfect venue for his very public downfall. The timing was absolutely perfect. All the newer residents who'd supported Kevin's tyranny were there to witness their hero's destruction. Along with several local news reporters, I'd quietly invited to document what was about to unfold. Kevin was in the middle of his usual pompous presentation about maintaining community standards when FBI Special Agent Jennifer Morrison walked through the clubhouse doors, followed by representatives from the State Agricultural Department, the County District Attorney's Office, and the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. The look of confused panic that spread across Kevin's face was absolutely priceless. One moment, he was the all-powerful HOA president lecturing his subjects, and the next he was staring at federal agents who clearly weren't there for a friendly chat about neighborhood regulations. Kevin Matthews, Agent Morrison announced in her clear, authoritative voice, "You're under arrest for federal violations of agricultural protection laws, mail fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy to defraud a homeowners association." The entire room went dead silent, except for the sound of phones starting to record as Kevin supporters realized they were witnessing their leader's complete destruction. Brad Henderson and Tyler Walsh, Kevin's faithful enforcers, looked like deer caught in headlights as Agent Morrison continued reading the charges that included their own names as co-conspirators in Kevin's criminal enterprise. But the real shock came when Agent Morrison began presenting the evidence that my legal team and I had been assembling for months, starting with the high-definition video footage of Kevin's illegal road blockade that clearly showed him confessing his crimes while live streaming to the community Facebook page. The agents had brought a large monitor that displayed Kevin's own words as he explained his plan to drive out the farmers and convert their properties for more suitable residents, providing undeniable proof of his discriminatory conspiracy against the agricultural community. The financial evidence was even more damaging than Kevin's recorded confessions, as state investigator Robert Kumar presented detailed analysis showing how Kevin had embezzled over $180,000 from HOA funds through his fake consulting companies and fraudulent enforcement contracts. The spreadsheets and bank records painted a picture of systematic theft that had been going on since Kevin's first month as HOA president, with money that should have gone to community maintenance instead being funneled into Kevin's personal accounts and used to fund his harassment campaigns against residents who opposed him. Kevin's attempts to deny everything only made his situation worse, as Agent Morrison calmly presented recorded phone conversations between Kevin and his co-conspirators where they discussed planting fake evidence, bribing county officials, and coordinating their attacks against specific community members. My security system had captured not just video evidence, but audio recordings of Kevin's planning meetings, where he'd laid out his strategy to eliminate the undesirable elements from the community through systematic harassment and illegal enforcement actions. The most devastating moment came when Agent Morrison revealed that Kevin Surveyor, the man who'd provided the fake property maps used to justify the road blockade, had been cooperating with federal investigators for weeks and had provided detailed testimony about Kevin's conspiracy to fabricate evidence and file fraudulent legal claims. The surveyor had recorded his conversations with Kevin, capturing him explicitly ordering the creation of false documents and discussing his plans to seize properties from longtime residents who couldn't afford to fight his legal challenges. As the handcuffs clicked around Kevin's wrists, the man who'd spent 2 years terrorizing our community was reduced to a babbling, panicked mess, desperately trying to blame his crimes on everyone except himself, while the residents he'd victimized watched his complete destruction. The local news cameras captured every moment of his humiliation, from his arrest to his perp walk out of the same clubhouse, where he'd ruled like a petty dictator for 2 years. Brad and Tyler were arrested moments later, their dreams of easy HOA stipends replaced by the reality of federal criminal charges and potential prison time. The next morning brought even more spectacular justice, as Kevin's mugshot appeared on the front page of every local newspaper alongside headlines about HOA president arrested in federal fraud case and rural community fighting back against corrupt leadership. But the media coverage was just the beginning of Kevin's complete destruction. The real karma came when federal agents executed search warrants on his home, his office, and his bank accounts, seizing everything connected to his criminal enterprise, including his luxury car, his expensive suits, and the gold watch he'd love to flash while intimidating his neighbors. Kevin's arrest triggered a cascade of additional investigations that exposed the full extent of his corruption, revealing that his crimes went far beyond what even I had suspected during my months of preparation. The IRS discovered that Kevin had been operating an elaborate tax evasion scheme, using his fake consulting companies not just to steal HOA funds, but to hide income from his previous business ventures and avoid paying federal taxes for over 5 years. The Financial Crimes Unit calculated that Kevin owed over $400,000 in back taxes, penalties, and interest, effectively bankrupting him before his criminal trial even began. But perhaps the most satisfying aspect of Kevin's downfall was watching his network of supporters abandon him the moment they realized they'd been backing a criminal who'd been stealing their money while pretending to protect their interests. The newer residents who'd signed his petitions and supported his harassment campaigns against the ranchers suddenly discovered that their HOA dues had been funding Kevin's personal lifestyle rather than community improvements, and they were absolutely furious about being manipulated and robbed by someone they trusted with their neighborhood's welfare. The civil lawsuits began flooding in within days of Kevin's arrest, as every resident he'd victimized with fraudulent fines and illegal enforcement actions filed claims for damages, emotional distress, and violation of their civil rights. My neighbor Pete, who Kevin had fined repeatedly for excessive farm odors despite operating a legitimate agricultural business for decades, led a class action lawsuit that sought millions in damages for Kevin's systematic harassment of the community's farming families. The legal fees alone from defending against these lawsuits would have been enough to destroy Kevin financially, even without the criminal charges he was facing. Kevin's attempts to make bail were rejected when the judge learned about his history of intimidating witnesses and his threats against community members who'd oppose his regime, leading to him spending weeks in county jail while his expensive lawyer tried unsuccessfully to negotiate a plea deal that would keep him out of federal prison. The man who'd enjoyed wielding power over his neighbors was now powerless himself, sitting in a cell while his criminal empire collapsed around him and his victims celebrated their freedom from his tyranny. The most poetic justice came when the federal court ordered Kevin to pay restitution to every resident he'd victimized, including full refunds of all fraudulent fines, plus interest and damages for emotional distress caused by his harassment campaigns. The total amount came to over $850,000, which combined with his tax debts and legal fees meant that Kevin would be financially ruined for the rest of his life, even if he somehow managed to avoid the 20-year federal prison sentence that prosecutors were seeking for his crimes. But the ultimate karma moment arrived when Kevin was forced to watch from his jail cell as the community he tried to control celebrated their liberation by hosting the biggest block party in Willowbrook Ranch community history, complete with live country music, barbecue cooked by the ranchers he'd tried to drive away, and a ceremonial burning of all the fraudulent HOA citations he'd issued during his reign of terror. The event was covered by local television stations, ensuring that Kevin's humiliation was broadcast throughout the region as his former victims danced and celebrated their victory over his corrupt regime. With Kevin Matthews behind bars awaiting trial and his corrupt enforcement network completely dismantled, the Willowbrook Ranch community experienced a renaissance that transformed our neighborhood from a place of fear and harassment into the peaceful, friendly community it had been before Kevin's arrival. The first order of business was completely restructuring the HOA, eliminating the dictatorial president position and creating a democratic council where every resident had an equal voice in community decisions, ensuring that no future Kevin could ever again seize control and terrorize his neighbors. The most satisfying part of our victory came when I was able to purchase the HOA Clubhouse at the federal asset forfeiture auction for a fraction of its value, since Kevin's criminal activities had made it part of his seized estate that needed to be liquidated to pay his restitution debts. I bought the building where Kevin had held his tyrannical court for exactly $50,000, then spent another $30,000 converting it into the most beautiful horse barn in 3 counties, complete with luxury stalls for my prize bulls and a trophy room displaying all the awards my cattle had won over the years. Every morning when I walked into my new barn, the same space where Kevin had plotted against his neighbors and planned his harassment campaigns, I couldn't help but smile at the perfect irony of the situation. The building that had once been the headquarters of Kevin's corrupt empire was now home to the very cattle operation he'd tried so hard to destroy, and the livestock he'd called a nuisance were now living in luxury while he sat in a federal prison cell contemplating his crimes. The community healing process was remarkable to witness, as neighbors who'd been turned against each other by Kevin's manipulation and spy networks began talking again and working together to rebuild the trust and cooperation that had made our area special. Old Pete Johnson organized weekly barbecues where longtime residents shared stories with newer families about the community's agricultural heritage, helping everyone understand and appreciate the rural lifestyle that Kevin had tried so hard to eliminate. My road, the same access route that Kevin had illegally blocked in his final, desperate grab for power, became a symbol of our victory over tyranny and a reminder that bullies who abuse their authority will eventually face justice for their crimes. I had a beautiful stone monument installed at the entrance, engraved with the words Freedom Road, in memory of those who stand up to tyrants, ensuring that future generations would remember the importance of fighting back against corruption and abuse of power. The federal case against Kevin resulted in his conviction on all charges, earning him an 18-year prison sentence that would keep him locked up well into his 60s, along with lifetime probation and a permanent ban on serving in any leadership position within homeowners associations or municipal governments. His co-conspirators Brad Henderson and Tyler Walsh received shorter sentences, but were also permanently barred from HOA involvement, ensuring they could never again participate in the kind of harassment and intimidation they'd helped Kevin orchestrate. But perhaps the most rewarding outcome was seeing how our successful fight against Kevin's corruption inspired other communities facing similar HOA abuse to stand up for their rights and demand accountability from their leaders. I received calls from residents across the state who were dealing with their own versions of Kevin Matthews, and I was able to share the strategies and resources that had helped us achieve justice, turning our local victory into a broader movement for HOA reform and resident protection. The ranch that Kevin had tried so hard to destroy became more successful than ever. As the publicity from our legal victory attracted visitors from across the region who wanted to see the cattle operation that had stood up to corruption and won. My agricultural business expanded significantly, and I was able to hire several local workers whose families had been victimized by Kevin's regime, providing them with good jobs and helping to strengthen the community's economic foundation for years to come. 5 years after Kevin Matthews first chained my ranch road and thought he'd won his war against our community, I'm writing this story from the office I built inside my beautiful barn, the same space where Kevin once held his corrupt committee meetings and planned his harassment campaigns against innocent neighbors. The transformation couldn't be more perfect. Where Kevin's desk used to sit, I now have a comfortable reading chair overlooking the pastures where my prize-winning cattle graze peacefully, completely unbothered by the suburban drama that once threatened their home. The final chapter of Kevin's downfall came when he was released from federal prison after serving 12 years of his 18-year sentence, only to discover that the world had moved on completely without him and that his reputation as a corrupt HOA tyrant had followed him everywhere he tried to rebuild his life. Kevin attempted to start a property management consulting business, apparently learning nothing from his criminal conviction, but every potential client who Googled his name immediately found the news articles, court documents, and even YouTube videos about his spectacular fall from power. The most delicious irony came when Kevin tried to move back to our area, probably hoping that time had softened people's memories of his crimes, only to discover that the monument at the entrance to Freedom Road had become a local landmark that tourists visited to learn about the community that stood up to corruption. Kevin's name was literally etched in stone as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked power and the importance of fighting back against tyranny, ensuring that his legacy would forever be one of shame and defeat rather than the authority he'd craved. My cattle operation has become one of the most successful ranches in 3 counties, with visitors regularly touring the facility to see both the agricultural operation and the historic barn that represents our victory over corruption. The trophy room displays not just my cattle's awards, but also framed newspaper clippings about our legal victory, the federal court documents that convicted Kevin, and photos from the community celebration we held after his sentencing, creating a permanent record of what happens when good people refuse to be intimidated by bullies. The HOA reforms we implemented after Kevin's removal have been adopted by dozens of other communities facing similar corruption problems, creating a model for democratic governance that prevents future dictators from seizing control of neighborhood associations. Our success story has been featured in legal journals, community governance textbooks, and even a documentary film about HOA abuse, ensuring that Kevin's crimes will continue to serve as a warning to potential tyrants for generations to come. Old Pete Johnson, now in his 80s, still loves to tell visitors about the day federal agents arrested Kevin in the middle of his pompous committee meeting, describing it as the most beautiful thing I ever saw in 60 years of living in this community. Pete's grandchildren now play in the same fields where Kevin once prowled with his clipboard, hunting for violations to cite, and they're growing up in a neighborhood where cooperation and respect have replaced fear and intimidation as the governing principles of community life. The financial restitution Kevin was ordered to pay helped fund major improvements throughout the community, including new playground equipment, road repairs, and landscaping projects that Kevin's embezzlement had prevented during his reign of terror. Every time I drive past these improvements, I'm reminded that Kevin's greed and corruption ultimately backfired completely, forcing him to pay for the very community enhancements he'd stolen money to prevent during his time in power. As I sit here in my barn office, watching my cattle graze peacefully in the Texas sunset, while the distant sound of children playing echoes from the neighborhood Kevin once terrorized, I can't help but reflect on the perfect justice of our situation. The man who tried to destroy our rural way of life ended up strengthening it. His corruption exposed the importance of community solidarity, and his criminal actions ultimately led to reforms that protected countless other neighborhoods from similar abuse. The lesson Kevin Matthews learned too late is that real power comes not from intimidating your neighbors or abusing your authority, but from building genuine relationships and earning respect through honest service to your community. something he never understood during his brief, destructive reign as our would-be dictator. Have you ever had an HOA nightmare where corrupt leaders tried to abuse their power? Share your story in the comments below. And remember that standing up to bullies and fighting for justice isn't just possible. It's essential for protecting our communities from the Kevin Matthews of the world who think they can terrorize honest people without consequences. The morning sun streams through the windows of my barn office as I prepare for what has become an annual tradition: hosting the Kevin Matthews Memorial Conference on HOA Accountability, a gathering that brings together residents, legal experts, and community leaders from across the nation to share strategies for preventing HOA corruption and protecting homeowner rights. The irony isn't lost on anyone that we're holding this conference in the very building where Kevin once plotted his reign of terror, now transformed into a symbol of justice and community resilience that attracts visitors from hundreds of miles away. This year's conference features over 200 attendees, including federal investigators who used our case as a model for prosecuting similar HOA fraud schemes, attorneys who specialize in homeowner protection laws, and dozens of residents who successfully fought their own battles against corrupt HOA leadership using the strategies we developed during our war with Kevin. The main presentation hall, built where Kevin's committee room used to be, displays a permanent exhibit featuring court documents, evidence photos, and testimonials from the families Kevin victimized, creating an educational resource that helps others recognize and combat similar abuse in their own communities. The most rewarding part of hosting this conference is meeting families who were inspired by our story to stand up to their own HOA tyrants, like the Martinez family from Arizona, who used our legal brief as a template to expose their HOA president's embezzlement scheme, or the group of retirees from Florida who successfully challenged fraudulent architectural restrictions that were being used to force them out of their homes. Each success story validates the decision to fight back against Kevin's corruption and proves that bullies in positions of power can be defeated when communities work together with proper legal support. Kevin's former enforcers, Brad Henderson and Tyler Walsh, have become cautionary tales in their own right, with Brad working as a night security guard at a warehouse after serving his prison sentence and being permanently banned from any HOA involvement, while Tyler moved 3 states away and now works at a call center. His dreams of easy money through neighborhood harassment replaced by the reality of honest work at minimum wage. Both men learned the hard way that following a corrupt leader's orders doesn't exempt you from criminal responsibility when those orders involve breaking federal laws. The financial impact of our victory continues to benefit the community in ways Kevin never could have imagined when he was stealing HOA funds to finance his harassment campaigns. The restitution money he was forced to pay funded not just immediate repairs and improvements, but also established an endowment that provides ongoing maintenance and enhancement of community facilities, ensuring that future residents will benefit from Kevin's crimes being exposed and prosecuted. The fund also provides legal assistance to other communities facing HOA abuse, spreading the impact of our victory far beyond the borders of Willowbrook Ranch. My cattle operation has expanded to include an educational component, with school groups and agricultural students regularly visiting to learn about sustainable ranching practices and rural community history, including the story of how we preserved our agricultural heritage against urban development pressure and corrupt political interference. The kids love feeding the bulls and hearing about the bad man who tried to steal the farm, though we always emphasize the positive lessons about standing up for what's right and working together to solve problems rather than dwelling on Kevin's criminal behavior. The documentary film about our battle with Kevin, titled Chained Roads, A Community's Fight Against Corruption, premiered at the Dallas International Film Festival and has been screened at community centers and law schools across the country, helping to educate people about HOA abuse and inspire others to take action when they encounter similar problems. The film's most powerful moment is the footage of Kevin's arrest, contrasted with scenes of our community celebration afterward, showing the dramatic transformation from fear to freedom that our victory achieved. Pete Johnson, now recognized as the unofficial historian of our community's triumph over corruption, has written a book about the experience that's become required reading in several university courses on local government and community organizing, ensuring that future civic leaders will understand both the dangers of unchecked power and the importance of citizen activism in protecting democratic values. Pete's grandchildren have grown up hearing the story of how their community defeated a bully, giving them confidence that ordinary people can make extraordinary changes when they refuse to accept injustice. The legal precedent established by Kevin's conviction has been cited in dozens of subsequent HOA fraud cases, helping prosecutors across the country secure convictions against corrupt community leaders and providing a roadmap for federal agencies investigating similar schemes. The Department of Justice has used our case study in training programs for agents who specialize in municipal corruption and white-collar crime, ensuring that Kevin's legacy will continue to help law enforcement protect communities from predatory leadership for decades to come. As I watch conference attendees touring the barn and learning about our journey from victims to victors, I'm struck by how Kevin's attempt to destroy our community ultimately made us stronger, more united, and more committed to protecting the rights and freedoms he tried to take away. The man who wanted to be remembered as a powerful leader who brought order to chaos will instead be remembered as a cautionary tale about the consequences of abusing authority and the power of communities to fight back against tyranny. The final session of each year's conference always ends with a ceremonial walk down Freedom Road, where participants can see the stone monument and reflect on the importance of standing up to corruption wherever it appears, whether in HOA boardrooms, city councils, or any other place where power can be abused at the expense of ordinary citizens who just want to live their lives in peace. Tonight, as the conference attendees head home with new knowledge and renewed determination to protect their own communities, I'll sit in my office surrounded by the awards my cattle have won, the thank you letters from families we've helped, and the legal documents that ended Kevin Matthews' criminal career, knowing that sometimes the best revenge against a bully isn't just defeating them. It's using that victory to help others avoid becoming victims in the first place. Disclaimer: the story you just watched is fictional. It explores themes of neighborly conflict, the abuse of authority, and the strategic triumph over injustice. This narrative aims to highlight the importance of standing up for your rights and the dramatic consequences of underestimating a determined individual.